Hello, horror fans, and welcome back to Jay vs. Horror. I am your host, Jay Wall, and today, guys, we are going to be talking about the new CBS series, Clarice. Now, Clarice picks up after the events portrayed in the 1991 film, The Silence of the Lambs, and also the novel of the same name from Thomas Harris. The series serves as a deep dive into the untold personal story of Clarice Starling, played by Rebecca Breeds, as she returns to the field to pursue serial murderers and sexual predators while navigating the high-stakes political world of Washington, D.C. Now, as far as the cast goes, there's not a lot of really great actors in this that are recognizable to everyone. I'm not saying they're bad actors. I'm just saying we don't have a lot of names here. When I first started watching it, the only name that I remembered seeing before was Kal Penn, of course, from Harold and Kumar, right? And he's done a lot of other stuff, including a lot of TV appearances. But yeah, so they didn't really go out on a limb with casting here. I mean, Rebecca Breeds, I'm not sure. I know she was in a series called Blue Water High and a soap opera called Home and Away, but she's an Australian actress and she's trying to fake a West Virginian accent. It kind of works, kind of doesn't. So I'm going to start off, guys, and talk about the things I do like about this series so far. We've watched the first 2 episodes, and I will say this, it's not terrible. The writing for the episodes is good as far as the storyline goes, and I would give both episodes somewhere around 7 to 7.5 out of 10. I think the second episode was actually a little stronger than the first episode because it's really hard to kick something like this off. Now, in the first episode, we see that Clarice is talking to her therapist in the opening scene, and then she's drugged back to Washington, D.C. to become a part of this task force that is out there trying to catch serial killers. It was put together by Ruth Martin, who was a senator in Silence of the Lambs. I believe she is the Attorney General now in this new series. She is, of course, the mother of Catherine Martin, who was Bill's last intended victim that Clarice saved. So this opening scene with the therapist and then the next scene with Ruth Martin, this is all exposition. The first one is done pretty poorly, in my opinion. It's just Clarice talking and telling us everything we need to know to get a jump-off point for this series, right? And then, of course, there's more exposition when she meets Ruth Martin. And then we finally get into the story here, which is that someone is going around killing women, biting them, stabbing them, and shooting them in the head. Clarice does not believe it's a serial killer. And so we have an interesting kind of dynamic here where in most stories, the cops don't want to put out that it's a serial killer. They want to try to keep it contained until there's 3, 4, 5 bodies before they'll actually say it's a serial killer because they don't want to panic people. In this story, they want it to be a serial killer to kind of prove that this task force is needed. So I did find that part very interesting. Now, I'm not going to give away the end of this because it seems like what's happening here is a setup for an overarching story that's going to continue through this season. Hopefully, maybe throughout the entire series, I don't know. But there's no real definite resolution to this episode. It's left open. And so then we move on to the next episode. And the next episode is kind of a Waco type situation that Clarice gets involved in. And she finds out there's a lot more to the story once she's inside this compound. So that's about as much as I can tell you guys about the episodes specifically without spoiling them. But I'll say this. Look, like I said, the performance here from Rebecca Breeds is pretty good. It's not Jodie Foster level, but it's pretty decent. She's struggling with the accent a little bit, it sounds like. And she's also struggling to kind of find the character of Clarice because Clarice is a person who's very powerful inside, even though she's not physically powerful. And like I said, some of the other things I liked, the writing is pretty good. I thought the second episode was actually really good. And, I don't know these actors. I've seen them here and there, but they're not memorable to me other than Kal Penn, but they do a decent job. One thing I'll say is, yes, it does kind of have that same old CBS style, Criminal Minds, NCIS, that kind of thing. But they also take these weird moments like where Clarice is having flashbacks of what's happened and thinking back on other traumatic events in her life where they very much make it look like the series Hannibal. I mean, it almost looks like in those moments that they specifically tried to reach for that style. So now I'm going to talk about some of the problems that I have with this, and they are massive. I think there's some big problems with this series, and I don't think it's going to make it past the first season because of them. One, I think this type of a series is going to attract fans of the movie. Of course, it's going to attract fans who are very knowledgeable about the source material. So you can't make all these big changes and omissions without those people being somewhat offended by the way you've made this. And so one of my biggest problems here is, of course, they don't want to talk about Hannibal Lecter in this series because they don't have the rights to that character. So he is talked about once for about 5 seconds in the first episode, but his name is not used. And I don't understand how you can have this series without Hannibal Lecter, really, because it's only a year since the events that took place in The Silence of the Lambs. And as we all know, at this point, Hannibal Lecter is still out there on the loose, the world's most prolific serial killer, and has a very strong attachment to Clarice, and he's never mentioned. That seems odd to me. Everyone talks about Buffalo Bill in this. This Buffalo Bill, Buffalo Bill, Buffalo Bill. It actually becomes a trigger for Clarice. I mean, every time someone says that name or even references that situation, she goes off into this weird fantasy flashback world and has to snap back to reality. But like I said, they never talk about Hannibal Lecter, and I just don't see how the series can exist. I don't see how the character of Clarice can go on without some reference to Hannibal Lecter. Now, another problem I had came in episode 2, where they started to show some flashbacks of Clarice's childhood that don't make sense. My understanding, maybe I'm wrong, it's been a long time since I read the book. It's probably been 15 years. Actually, between the books, Red Dragon was my favorite, so I've read that 3 or 4 times, and I've read it recently within the last 4 or 5 years. However, I just don't remember this being a part of Clarice's childhood. Now, the way I remember it, she lived with her father. Her father was shot, and that's when she was sent to a foster home, which is where the whole story of the lambs comes from, right? She tries to rescue a baby lamb. However, she's unsuccessful, and it becomes very traumatic for her and becomes a driving force for why she's trying to rescue other people. She wasn't able to save her father as a child, and she also wasn't able to save these lambs. So until she was able to save Catherine Martin, the lambs wouldn't stop screaming, right? So that was the whole point of her interaction, her quid pro quo with Dr. Lecter. And they have changed her background massively here. It shows a scene of her with her mother after her father's been shot, and it refers to her brothers and sisters. And so all that doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand how that works into what happened to Clarice, which is a pretty major plot point of her life that leads us down this road. You know, other than that, guys, I thought it was pretty good. It's fairly decent. It's not on the level of Hannibal. Don't get me wrong. You know, for me, Hannibal's like 9.5 out of 10. This is somewhere around 7 to 7.5, maybe for the second episode. And honestly, I just don't see the series surviving. I mean, I don't have a problem with it surviving, and I'm going to continue to watch it. And every now and then I'll jump on here and give you guys an update about what I think of the series, but I just don't think it's going to survive because, for one, it's not staying true to the source material, and you have a lot of fans of that. And people, I would say, like half the people that are going to tune into this are probably tuning in because they want to see more Silence of the Lambs material, or more Hannibal Lecter material, more Thomas Harris material, I would say. And so they're not going to be happy with this. I can tell you that right now. As a fan myself, there are very specific glaring problems with the series. And apparently it's not connecting with other audiences either, because after our first 2 episodes, I checked Rotten Tomatoes. It's only getting like 37% on Rotten Tomatoes, which makes it rotten, right? And it's also only getting about 6.5 on IMDb. So it's not getting a very good score from anyone at this point. So a lot of you know Regina. She's my wife, and she runs a channel here on YouTube also called Girls Love Horror 2. And Regina says something about remakes and reboots a lot that I'm going to repeat here because I think it really applies to this series. Her thoughts on it are that when people have something that they can compare a new version to, a new adaptation, a reboot, a remake, an extension, whatever you want to call it, when they have something to compare that to, it's always going to get downgraded. It's always going to get pushed down lower than it really is. And so, to be fair, I think the show is really pretty decent. It's like 7 to 7.5. It's not going to live up to Hannibal. It's not going to live up to the books or the films before it, but I don't think it's horrible. But what happens is when we have all these things to compare it to, it's going to take a significant drop from its actual quality. I don't know what you can do about that when you're creating a show or running a show or doing a reboot, remake, whatever, but I know what I would have done is I would have made sure this script for the first 2 episodes at least were hardcore solid. And I think they made a big mistake in the first episode by trying to set up too much. And also, I think that, it would have been interesting to see Clarice confront a female serial killer right after all this stuff that's happened with Buffalo Bill. And of course, Hannibal Lecter. Of course, she's dealing with Jack Crawford. She has all these powerful men who have influenced her life. I think it would have been interesting to see her go against a female serial killer or villain, whatever you want to call it, in that first episode, just to kind of shock everybody that it's not going to be what you think it is. But I digress. So all in all, guys, yes, I'm going to give the first episode a solid 7, the second episode 7.5, and we'll see from here. I'll keep checking in with you guys if the series stays on. I mean, it's not going to be cheap to shoot this, and if they see that it's not going anywhere, they'll probably cancel it maybe even before the first season's over with, unless they filmed all of it. I mean, I don't love it, but I also don't hate it. It's just not what you want. Sometimes, you go to the store and you buy the generic instead of buying the brand because it's a little bit cheaper, and then you go home and you take a bite and you're like, it kind of tastes like Oreos. It's kind of what you want it to be, but not exactly. And that's what this tastes like. It tastes like a recreation of something great that's not quite as good. Guys, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check us out on Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, you can help support our little channel and keep it growing. And as always, guys and ghouls, we will talk to you the next time we've got something worth talking about. Bye.